Hi, everybody. So I'm sure for those of you who are familiar with my research, you have seen this chart before. It's called Biblical Events Overlaying World History. And this actually, I'll make it smaller, is the whole of it, which goes over a lot of different data. But up here in the top corner, we have the correlation to Daniel's 70 weeks of years. From the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince. That is what is here. There shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. So the primary question is, how do we arrive at this date for the starting point? That comes from Nehemiah 2 in the 20th year of the reign of Artaxerxes, when Nehemiah was before him in the month Nisan. He was sad. The king questioned him. And then ultimately that led into Israel going back to Jerusalem to rebuild the city walls and the city gates. People have questioned recently. I had a subscriber question. It's probably a good thing so I can go through this because I have avoided going through this for various reasons. I don't know if I've avoided it or just haven't done it, but there is a camp of people out there who has this all messed up. So we're going to go through the reasons why it is all messed up. There is a historical record that exists that has nothing to do with the Bible. If you extrapolate or take back to the historical record the information from Nehemiah, which is the 20th year of the reign of Artaxerxes, you will find that it was Artaxerxes the first Longimanus, who, according to the historical record, that is just reporting history without bias or without some kind of alternate agenda, 465 BC. The church has its own agenda. The church, people from the church have their own agenda and have their own interpretation of how this should go. So they mess with the historical year given by encyclopedias, given by resources that are literally just reporting history in the years in which these things happen. And they twist it around to make it say what they want it to say. And the vast majority of this will come from converting Daniel's 70 weeks into a year count rather than a day count. There is no instruction given by Daniel to convert it to a year count at all. There is instruction taken in Daniel and in Revelation to convert it to a day count. That is by means of measuring the second half of the 70th week, by means of a time times it in half, which is 3.5 years, by means of 1,260 days, by means of 42 months. Taking all those three together, you have 12 30-day months comprising a 360-day year. Since any part of the 70 weeks is measured that way, then all parts of the 70 weeks are measured that way. And when we measure them based on day counts from 360-day years, we find that converting it to a year count is entirely inaccurate. I have down here in the bottom right of the screen a day count from point A to point B. The going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem, given in the month Nisan in the 20th year of the reign of Artaxerxes. Unto the Messiah the Prince, which would also, by necessity, be the month Nisan, because you're talking about an even period of time from beginning to end. So if it starts in Nisan, it's going to end in Nisan. Moreover, weeks of years are taken from Leviticus 25's weeks of years, the Sabbath cycles for the land, which all have a Nisan 10 start date, including the Jubilee year. If you will notice, 445 BC 232 AD is not 69 times 7. So I have this in front of me. This is what the question is based off of, people doing this. You have 69 weeks times 7 years per week equals 483 years. So the people who would seek to find this specific number of years from point A to point B, meaning from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince, are going to have to mess with the historical record. That is not what we are instructed to do. If and since Revelation and Daniel measure the second half of the 70th week based on day counts, and you extrapolate that over to the entirety of the 69 weeks of years that preceded, because all of the 70 weeks of years are going to operate the same way. From Nisan 10 to Nisan 10, 12 30-day months per year to equal 360 days. We do not use a calendar like that right now. And yet, that doesn't matter, because you can count a number of days from a starting point to arrive at an ending point. So instead of looking for a number of years, which we are not instructed to do, we look for a certain number of days. 69 weeks of years times 7 years per week times 360 days gives you a total of 173,880 days from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince. If we divide that by the calendar that most people are using, which is our modern 365-day calendar, you will note that 173,880 days equals 476 years. Now, granted, there's leap years and things like that in there, so it doesn't, doing the 365 days, equal exactly 476 years. But on a 360-day calendar, from Nisan to Nisan 10, it absolutely would. Which we can definitively state here, Nisan of 445 BC, I put negative because BC years, to Nisan 10 of 32 AD, you're in AD. So simply subtracting the difference here is 477, except there is no year 0. So you have to take that year out, which gives you 476 years between those two dates, which you would expect because they're based on a 360-day calendar. So when we take this back to here, now you can see how and why I arrived at my conclusion. Moreover, there's a little arrow down here, which takes us to the unto the Messiah the Prince, which was Palm Sunday, Nisan 10. We have the end of Jesus' ministry prophesied in the book of Daniel as unto the Messiah the Prince. The secondary reference, which does not give a day count or a specific year count, is from Zechariah 9, behold, thine king cometh unto thee, lowly and meek, riding the colt full of a donkey, is Palm Sunday. Palm Sunday, Nisan 1032 AD minus 3.5 years is Tishri 1028 AD. Jesus' ministry began on the Day of Atonement, where he became the substitutionary scapegoat per Leviticus 16 and agreed to bear all of Israel's sins upon himself in their place. And then he granted Jubilee, which is liberty via the forgiveness of sins, which is Leviticus 25:9. Thou shalt cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound in the 10th day of the 7th month in the Day of Atonement. You shall make the trumpet sound throughout all your land. The New Testament Jubilee is liberty via the forgiveness of sins, which Jesus proclaimed in Luke 4. The Spirit hath anointed me to preach good tidings unto the meek. He hath sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, the opening of the prison to them that are bound, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord. And that he did from the Day of Atonement, when he became the substitutionary scapegoat to take the sins of Israel from her and grant her grace via liberty instead. Now we can secondarily, and I say secondarily because primarily we located the end of his ministry via the years of Artaxerxes and Daniel's prophecy. So secondarily, we can validate the beginning of Jesus' ministry respected to John the Baptist's ministry, John the Baptist being 6 months older than Jesus per Luke 1, and John the Baptist who began his ministry in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius. According to the historical record, Tiberius began his reign in 14 AD. The 15th year was 28 AD. John the Baptist would have begun in the spring, Jesus in the fall. These years are very simple to arrive at if you simply use the biblical method of counting. Where people have gotten off course is they are desperately looking for 483 years. So what they have done, rather than using the 465 BC date from Artaxerxes, we'll go back over here. What they have done, rather than use the 465 BC year, is they have said, oh, no, it was 475, and so the 20th year must be 455. Okay, So we have 455 BC, and that gives them the extra wiggle room to allow that 483 years to shine through. So we've got, okay, it's not 445, it's 455 BC. So now we've got room to add 483 years. So that does not take us to 28 AD because, again, there's no year zero. So just like we had to subtract one here, we have to do the same here. Rather, we have to add one here. Here's how. On this same chart that I've been showing you, I always include the transition from BC to AD. When you're transitioning from 34 BC, which is the last of the Jubilee years, until AD, it's 34 BC, and then the next Jubilee is 16 AD. You can see here how there is no year zero. If there was a year zero, this would be 15 AD. But if we include a year zero on our calendar, it's not right. So you have to take out the year zero and then add another year in BC. The same would hold true for here. If you're adding a number of years in the transition from BC to AD, you have to take out year zero and then increase your count by 1. So that would bring us, if we are using what people say, oh no, it wasn't 465, it was 475, and so the 20th year is 455, and then we expect to see a count of 483, that would take us to 29 AD. I don't know of any reference material that would be any kind of thing that anyone would wish to actually pay attention to that says that Jesus came on Palm Sunday in 29 AD. Because he didn't. There is no historical reference material that you can find that's worth a darn that would substantiate that. So there are one of two things that happen at this point. You could either, and both of these are incorrect, mind you, because all of this over here is correct, not this. But if people are bound and determined to do this, then they have to do one of two things. First of all, this is going to be in the month Nisan, and regardless, that's going to be in the month Nisan. Because it's an even period of time from beginning to ending. So just like we count our years from New Year's Day to New Year's Day to New Year's Day, it would be Nisan 10 to Nisan 10 to Nisan 10. So the first wrong thing that people do is they say, oh, well, this must be the beginning of Jesus' ministry, that unto the Messiah the Prince calculates to the beginning of Jesus' ministry. And then they would add 3.5 years and hey, look, 33 AD. Except Jesus didn't begin his ministry in the month Nisan. He ended his ministry in the month Nisan. He began his ministry in the month Tishri on the Day of Atonement. So you couldn't even make a plausible case for this because, and I have every reason to suspect that this is why Jesus' ministry was 3.5 years rather than 3 years. So we couldn't come to an inaccurate conclusion based on the different months for the beginning and the ending of it. You can't do this and arrive at a correct conclusion because, first of all, Jesus didn't begin his ministry in the month Nisan, and 3.5 years later would be the month Tishri. He didn't die in the month Tishri. So this is all backwards. So that's the first thing people do. The second thing that people could do is they'll say, oh, so that means that this means that people, sorry, I had to pause my video for a second. The second thing that people could do is they could say, okay, as they should, this takes you to the unto the Messiah the Prince. Somehow, some way, people then add, and I don't even know how they would do this, they add 3.5 years on from this point to this point and say that Jesus died halfway into the 70th week. Regardless of how people choose to do this, I don't know how. As you can see, I'm struggling here to try to understand why people do this because none of it makes sense. It's very clear from the historical records that Artaxerxes began his reign in the fall 465 BC. So even if you try to say it was 475, you're still going to be in conflict with the months. The weeks of years begin in the month Nisan, and all 4 of the reference points regarding the 70 weeks, from the going forth of the commandment in the month Nisan to the Messiah the Prince, Nisan 10. The beginning of the 70th week is bookmarked in Nisan 10 of the final Jubilee year from the book of Ezekiel, chapter 40. And Joel 2 tells you that the second coming is going to be in the first month, which is the month Nisan. So, taken in conjunction, and the beginning of Jesus' ministry beginning on Tishri 10, the Day of Atonement, there is literally no way that you could make this work. Even if you were to get to the right years, you couldn't make it work because you'd be in the wrong months. The Bible will exclude all of the wrong things until you can only conclude the right thing. And I'm sorry to tell you who don't want to believe this, the rest of you who would be happy to believe this because it's easy, because it should be easy, this is how you do it. You convert it to a day count because Daniel 12 and Revelation tell you that you need to. And if that applies to part of it, it applies to the whole of it. Just like Nisan 10, if it applies to any part of it, it applies to every year of it. Because that's the way in which weeks of years were established. From the when you shall come into your land, the land shall declare a Sabbath unto the Lord. 6 years thou shalt sow thy field, prune thy vineyard, gather in the fruits thereof. The 7th year shall be a year of rest. Shall number 7 Sabbaths of years, they shall be unto thee 49 years, and in the 50th year hallowed and proclaim Jubilee. The command was given when you shall come into your land. Well, that command was given in Joshua 4:19. We come up out of the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month and camped in Gilgal in the east border of Jericho. So just like the Nisan 10 date is going to apply to the beginning of every year in a week of years and the Jubilee years also, so is the 360-day year count. Prophecy is pattern. It's not going to diverge because God doesn't change. And there is instruction in multiple books of the Bible that tells you, when taken together, that it doesn't change. So even if you could make a case for this somehow, you would never wind up in the correct months, which tells you it's not right. If any part of it is not right, it's not right. So I don't know why people would mess with the historical record when it comes to the reigns of Artaxerxes. I do believe the only reason that they would try to do that is because they're trying to get to a 483 year count from point A to point B. That is not accurate. You need a day count. 173,880 days. It gives you exactly what you need, and it's very simple. It keeps everything in its place according to the prophecy. So if you guys have any questions, let me know. I appreciate the question was asked, why do some denominations say 455, 457, whatever? Who knows? But I do believe at its heart, it goes back to trying to find 483 years between the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem and to the Messiah the Prince. It's never going to be able to be done. And even if you could, you're still not going to be in the right months. And like I said, if any part of it is wrong, then the whole of it is wrong. You need to go back to the drawing board. And yeah, you don't even need to do that because it's all right here. If you guys have any questions or comments, let me know. But that is precisely how we get to this. And if you wonder where I pulled this from, just go look it up in an encyclopedia. Google. Google is a wonderful resource. If you are just looking for historical dates that are free from religious interference, just go look at an encyclopedia. Just Google Artaxerxes I Longinus, and you'll have encyclopedic resources. I could find 3, the Jewish one, the Iranian one, and the Britannica. 3 different countries. And why people say, well, Encyclopedia Iranica? Well, because Iran is modern-day Persia, and he was a Persian king. So if anybody's probably going to know their history, it might be them. So if you guys have any questions, let me know. But when people say, well, where did you get that from? Google. Use the internet and look it up. Very simple. You don't have to go to some, religious website or Bible website. Google it. Look for history. Type it in a search engine and look at the results. That's all you have to do. Sometimes we complicate things well beyond they need to be complicated. It doesn't really make sense why we do that. Don't complicate it. It's simple. You just have to not convert to a year count. And when you convert to the proper day count, it all makes perfect sense.